The official history of our world is a program with critical errors. It has files that won't open and artifacts that crash the system. Today we will expose 7 of these errors, 7 anomalies that shatter everything you were taught in school. How did the head of a 2nd century Roman soldier end up in a pristine 15th century tomb in pre-Columbian Mexico? Where did the 9th Spanish Legion, 5,500 elite soldiers, vanish, erased from the archives of the world's most bureaucratic empire? Who carved a 5-meter-tall idol covered in a complex code 7,000 years before the first pyramid was built? They will tell you it was a coincidence, a dating error, or a hoax. These are convenient words to close an inconvenient file and avoid rebooting the system. But we won't just recite textbooks. We will operate like cold case detectives for civilization. Our job is not to believe, but to verify, to find inconsistencies, to look at the numbers, because numbers don't lie. And the first piece of evidence waited for us for over 12,000 years in a Ural bog. It doesn't just question the official timeline, it completely breaks everything you've been told about the Stone Age and those who lived in it. The Ural peat bog, 1890. The smell of damp earth hangs in the air, a chill that seeps into your bones. Gold prospectors, sifting through the soil, stumble upon a piece of wood. But this is no mere fragment from an ancient forest. This is a piece of evidence that lay preserved in the bog for millennia, waiting for its moment. It is called the Shigir Idol, and it is 12,100 years old. I repeat, 12,100 years. That is twice as old as Stonehenge and 2.5 times older than the first pyramid at Giza. Official science tells us that the creators of this monument were hunter-gatherers, nomadic Stone Age tribes who had just survived the Ice Age. Think about that for a second. Primitive savages? They felled a 157-year-old larch with stone axes. From a single trunk, they carved a figure 5.3 meters tall, the height of a 2-story building. And they didn't just carve an idol, they covered it in code. Not drawings of animals or hunting scenes, but complex geometric information and 8 faces that stare at us through time. A cipher we still cannot decipher. Stop. This isn't a primitive tribe's ritual pole. It's a technological and intellectual statement. A message carved in wood that says one thing: our comfortable linear timeline of civilization is a lie. Someone possessed complex, abstract thought thousands of years before we allowed them to. But it gets worse. Because it's one thing to find a message that shouldn't exist. It's another to find evidence of a cult that demanded people burn down their own world to create something they would later have to hide in terror. Let's travel to Jordan, where dozens of empty eyes stare up at us from beneath the floors of ancient homes. The settlement of Ain Ghazal, modern-day Jordan, 9,000 years ago. You are digging through the dusty, packed earth floor of a Neolithic hut when your shovel hits something hard with a dull thud. It's not a stone, it's a forehead. Beneath your feet where children slept 9,000 years ago, dozens of meter-tall figures have been ritually buried. They are made of fired limestone, plaster. To produce plaster, you need a kiln and a temperature of 600 to 900 degrees Celsius. Let's do the math. That's the temperature of a modern industrial furnace. To maintain that level of heat, you need fuel. A lot of fuel. Pollen and charcoal analysis shows that they burned an entire forest to create these silent idols. This led to a local ecological disaster, soil erosion, and eventual collapse. The question is, why? What cult, what idea demanded such a colossal, self-destructive sacrifice of resources? They'll tell you it's simple. They'll call it ancestor worship, a neat, convenient explanation that gets passed from one textbook to another. But it fails to answer the most disturbing question: why were they buried? Why create something so technologically complex, so resource-intensive, only to hide it under the floor, as if it were something dangerous, something that had gotten out of control and had to be entombed forever. This is another error in the code of our history. Ancient technology we can't explain, and a ritualistic terror hidden from us under a layer of domestic waste. Their eyes are empty, but they are watching. Now, let's turn to an anomaly you can see but cannot touch. A place where nature itself seems to have gone mad and begun carving faces from stone. Or where someone very much wants us to think so. The Marcahuasi Plateau, Peru. 4,000 meters above sea level. The air is so thin that every breath is work, every step an effort. The wind cuts your face and the silence is deafening. And in this emptiness, on the roof of the world, they stand. Giant stone sculptures. Faces of people from different races, African, Semitic, and European profiles. Figures of animals that never existed in South America. Lions, camels, elephants. The most famous is the Monument to Humanity, a 25-meter-tall rock that, from different angles, reveals the faces of 4 distinct human races. Official geology offers a simple, elegant explanation: pareidolia. It's just a trick of the imagination, an optical illusion caused by bizarre patterns of wind and water erosion. For millions of years, the elements shape the rock, and our brains, programmed to find faces in everything, fill in the rest. It sounds convincing. I too considered this the only possible version, until I stumbled upon a fact that is usually edited out of popular accounts. Right at the foot of these accidental formations, literally in their shadow, lie ruins. The ruins of pre-Incan structures, ancient tombs, a necropolis. And this is where the official story falls apart. Think for a moment. Why did people, for thousands of years, choose this specific place, this gallery of random shapes, for their most sacred structures? Why did they bury their dead here? Were they all suffering from the same collective hallucination? Or did they see something else? Not an illusion, but the eroded, time-worn monuments of a civilization whose name has been lost to history. Coincidence doesn't work that way. It's one thing when humans change the landscape. It's another when the landscape itself holds the memory of those we have erased from history. But sometimes, nature strikes back, a blow that wipes out not just monuments, but entire cities. And this blow may have given birth to one of humanity's oldest and most enduring myths. Egypt, 4000 BC. Long before the first pharaohs, long before the pyramids. The city of Hierakonpolis, the city of the hawk. This wasn't just a settlement. It was an industrial, cultural, and religious center. The cradle of a civilization on the verge of exploding and conquering the entire Nile. It was a place of bustling activity, with thousands of pottery kilns smoking, power growing. And then came a wall of water. This was not the seasonal flooding of the Nile that the Egyptians were used to. This was a catastrophic, sudden deluge. The force of nature struck with such power that it swept everything away. The wind howls, and the air is thick with the smell of wet clay and death. When the water recedes, it leaves behind a shroud. In the 21st century, a team of archaeologists led by René Friedman peels it back, layer by layer, and they find something that shatters the peaceful image of pre-dynastic Egypt. Beneath the cultural layers lies a deposit of dense, sterile river silt up to 2 meters thick. 2 meters! Underneath it, a city frozen in its final moment. It is a scene from an apocalypse. Kilns are full of unfinished, still wet pottery. Tools are abandoned right where they were used. People fled with only their lives, taking nothing with them. They were just trying to survive, that's all. Officially, this is called a major flood. But the details scream of something else. This was a dress rehearsal for the end of the world, for an entire generation. a catastrophe that wiped the first Egypt off the face of the earth and set its development back by decades, if not centuries. And this is where it gets chilling. Think about it. What is the central creation myth of ancient Egypt? The world begins with the emergence of the first mound of dry land, the Benben, from the vast, chaotic primordial waters called Noon. From this mound, life and order begin. Does that remind you of anything? Millions of people who survived the horror of a total flood, who watched their world disappear under muddy water. And then, as the water receded, they saw the first hills emerge. For them, this was literally the recreation of their world. Stop. What if the creation myth isn't a fairy tale, not a philosophical concept? What if it's a report, a memory of a real, physical catastrophe so monstrous that it became the starting point of a new world, encoded in religion? The myth became a convenient, beautiful screen concealed a real tragedy, the true collapse of an entire people. They didn't invent the story, they lived it. And that is another system error in our understanding of the past. We look for metaphors in myths. We should be looking for disaster reports. But what if the disaster comes not from the water, but from the sky? And what if it leaves behind not a layer of silt, but a scorched terror in the memory of generations who had no writing to record it? Let's travel to the Andes, Peru. The Chachapoya civilization, the warriors of the clouds. They built their fortresses on misty mountain peaks, a people who existed from 800 to 1470 AD. They had no writing system. Remember that fact. It's crucial. Their entire history, all their knowledge, all their fears, it was all passed down orally, from father to son, from shaman to successor, a living, breathing, vulnerable memory. And within that memory, one protocol was preserved, one event so colossal that it survived centuries of oral transmission until it was recorded by the Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon. He wrote down what the descendants of the cloud warriors told him, and they didn't tell him about gods or heroes. They told him about a catastrophe. Listen. They described a great fiery flame in the sky, a tremendous noise that made the earth tremble, a blinding flash that turned night into day for an instant. This is not a metaphor. It's not a poetic image. It is a precise, almost technical description of a major bolide impact, an airburst similar to the Tunguska event, but in the Andes, and hundreds of years before Europeans even knew the continent existed. Think about it. You have no paper, no ink. Every day is a struggle for survival, and yet you dedicate the immense mental resources of entire people to passing down the same story, generation after generation. Why? Because it's not just a story. It's a warning. It's a survival protocol in case the sky falls again. We search for traces of ancient civilizations in stone and pottery shards. But what if the most important evidence is intangible? What if the most terrifying events in human history left scars not on the land, but in our collective memory? In the myths we've dismissed as fairy tales, the event was so traumatic that it became a central element of their cosmology. It shaped their fears, their rituals, their world. They saw a real apocalypse, and they survived to tell the tale. And this is another anomaly, another system glitch. We are conditioned to trust only written sources. Anything not written down is dismissed as folklore, as fiction. But what if this is arrogance? What if oral tradition is an equally reliable carrier of information, one that simply operates by different rules, especially when it comes to life and death? But sometimes, it's not memory that disappears, and not a city under a layer of silt. Sometimes, it's the people themselves. Not a tribe lost in the jungle, but 5,500 professional, heavily armed soldiers of the most bureaucratic and powerful empire of the ancient world. And they leave behind nothing at all, not even the order for their final mission. Britain, 108 AD. A cold, damp fog settles over the hills. The wind cuts your face. Here, at the fortress of Iberacum, modern-day York, England, the 9th Spanish Legion is stationed. 5,500 battle-hardened veterans, the elite of the Imperial Army. A killing machine that has marched across Europe. They carve their name in stone, marking the completion of the fortress. This is the last reliable record of their existence. Then, silence. Complete, absolute silence in the archives. After 120 AD, the Legion simply vanishes from all Roman records. No orders for redeployment. No casualty reports. No lists of veterans receiving their pensions. Nothing. It is as if its existence was neatly erased from the most detailed and pedantic bureaucratic system of the ancient world. This is a black hole in Roman history. They will tell you, it's simple. They were annihilated in an ambush by the wild Pictish tribes in the north, in Scotland. It sounds like an explanation, but it's not. Fine, let's assume that's true. Then show us the battlefield. Show us the mass grave of 5,500 men in Roman armor. Show us thousands of weapons. And most importantly, where is the lost Aquila, the legion's eagle standard, the sacred symbol for which legionaries would die rather than surrender? Archaeologists have been searching for over a century. There is nothing, not a single piece of physical evidence of a total defeat. Then another theory emerges. They were secretly transferred to the east, where they perished in a war with Parthia or during a revolt in Judea. Another convenient patch over the whole. But this one frays even faster. The Roman Empire was a machine of protocol. Moving an entire legion halfway across the world was a colossal logistical operation. It would have left dozens, hundreds of records, orders, supply manifests, road permits, mentions in provincial archives. Those don't exist either. This is not just a military mystery, it's a paradox. 5,500 professional soldiers cannot simply dissolve into the fog. This is a hole in the protocols of the most organized machine of antiquity. And this hole is more frightening than any defeat, because it proves one thing. History can be more than rewritten. It can be deleted. Erased so completely that not even a scar remains. And now, for an artifact that deletes not a legion, but entire continents and oceans from the official version of our past. Mexico, 1933. The Valley of Tecasic-Calislehuaca. Archaeologist Jose Garcia Payon is excavating a tomb. The heat, the dust, the tense silence of a place sealed for nearly 500 years. It is an untouched burial. I repeat, untouched. It is dated between 1476 and 1510, the Aztec era. No European had set foot here for centuries before that. So says the textbook. Among the burial goods are figurines and pottery, all in their proper places, all consistent with the period. And among them is something that could not possibly be there. Physically impossible. A small terracotta head. A bearded man. His features are not typical of Mesoamerican art. They are distinctly Mediterranean, Roman. The style dates to the 2nd or 3rd century AD. They will tell you it's simple. Of course, it was a hoax. A fake. One of the workers planted the artifact as a prank on the archaeologists. For decades, this was the primary, convenient theory. It allowed them to avoid asking uncomfortable questions. The head was labeled a problematic artifact, stored away and forgotten. Because if it's not a fake, everything collapses. That was the story until the 1990s, when physicists from Germany's Max Planck Institute took on the case. They conducted a thermoluminescence analysis. In simple terms, this method determines when the clay was last fired. It cannot be fooled. The result was unequivocal. The artifact is ancient. It had been in the ground for hundreds of years before it was discovered. Stop. Let's go over that again, slowly. An untouched 15th century Aztec burial. Inside, an artifact stylistically dated to the 2nd century Roman Empire, and scientific confirmation of its genuine antiquity. This is not an excavation error. It is not a coincidence. It is physical proof. Proof that the Atlantic Ocean was crossed 1,300 years before Columbus. And this small, inconvenient piece of fired clay doesn't just break one theory. It breaks the entire concept of isolated worlds upon which our history books are built. And this is where the textbooks begin to unravel. Wait, let's stop and look at all the evidence together. A 12,000-year-old code in the Urals, created thousands of years before humans supposedly learned to build. High-tech plaster firing in the Neolithic period, a process that required burning an entire forest for statues that were then hidden under the floor as if they were dangerous. Giant stone faces in Peru, at an altitude of 4,000 meters, which official science calls a trick of nature, yet at whose feet people built temples and tombs for millennia. A forgotten flood in predynastic Egypt, so powerful it erased an entire city and gave birth to the myth of creation from chaos. A cosmic impact in the Andes that became an unhealed scar in the collective memory of an entire nation of cloud warriors. An entire elite legion, 5,500 professional soldiers, simply vanished from the records of the most bureaucratic empire of antiquity. And a Roman in an Aztec tomb. These are not 7 different stories. They are 7 error reports from the same program. Individually, they are mysteries that can be ignored. Together, they form a pattern. A pattern that screams at us that the official, linear, convenient history of human development is incomplete. Perhaps deliberately incomplete. I understand why these facts are disliked. They are inconvenient. They require rewriting hundreds of books, reevaluating museum exhibits, and answering deeply uncomfortable questions. It is easier to label them anomalies and file them away in a dusty archive. It is easier to attribute them to ritual significance or dating errors. It is all too convenient to be true. Each of these facts is a nail in the coffin of the simple, straightforward history we are taught in school. A story of linear progress from primitive hunters to great civilizations. But this evidence paints a different picture. A world of breakthroughs and collapses. A world where technologies existed that we cannot comprehend. A world where catastrophes occurred that wiped entire civilizations off the map, leaving only echoes in myths and strange artifacts in the ground. But one primary question remains. If all of this is true, what history is being hidden from us? And more importantly, why? Listen, the enemy here is not a secret government or men in black who erase your memory. It is far worse. The enemy is the system, a cumbersome, sluggish, lazy system called academic silence, institutional inertia. To acknowledge the Roman in the Mexican tomb is to admit that the entire history of contact between civilizations is built on a false foundation. It means rewriting thousands of books, reassembling hundreds of museum exhibits, and defending thousands of new dissertations. It is a colossal amount of work. And the system does not want to do it. It is far easier to defend the old, comfortable version to the very end. And this is how that defense mechanism works. Watch closely. The Shigir Idol? It's called a unique artifact that doesn't change the overall picture, just an exception to the rule. The stone faces on the Marcahuasi plateau? Pareidolia, just a trick of the imagination, an optical illusion. The head from Takaki Calixtlahuaca? Probable contamination of the cultural layer during excavation. Just an archaeological mistake. For every single piece of evidence, for every glitch in the program, the system has a convenient, soothing explanation. And it works. But only as long as you look at them one by one. The moment you line them up, the entire defense system collapses. because it is no longer a series of coincidences. It is a pattern that screams that the official version is cracking at the seams. Forget what you've been told. I too once thought these were just a collection of interesting puzzles, until I saw that they all point to the same conclusion. Our ancestors were not simpler or more primitive than us. They were different. They created technologies whose logic we cannot grasp. They survived planetary-scale catastrophes that we don't even know about. And they preserved the memory of them in codes and myths. And this brings us to the final verdict. Because when the facts break the theory, you have to throw the theory out, without regret.